Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest narration of the web series Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 71, Angry Birds. Mothership, standing by, requesting pilot input. I stood there, in silence, my glazed-over eyes locking with that of the Venerian, who stood defiantly at my shins. Mothership standing by, requesting pilot input. The incessant reminders from the flight warning systems blared at me to refocus my attention back at the task at hand. And yet, I found myself incapable of doing so, as the Venerian had transitioned from simply gesturing at my gun with his eyeballs to outright pointing at it with his index finger, dropping all pretenses at subtlety. I was at a loss for words. Initiate automatic flight path mode, Cadet Booker. The EVI finally chimed in, putting me out of my reverie of disbelief as I finally found it in me to respond. No, just keep where it is. Hold position until I get the situation sorted, I ordered. They acknowledged, holding position. With that out of the way, I now placed my attention squarely on the Venerian, putting my armored fist against my armored hips. There was no other way of addressing this, for one word was enough to sum up my confusions up to this point. Why, I thought you'd never ask, Earthrealmer, Eleanor replied with a huff, though not an indignant one, for whatever that was worth. I'm at a loss for my current position, he admitted reluctantly, practically forcing those words through his teeth. I'll be forthright in addressing what needs to be addressed, as you will require every detail necessary in order to aid me in our urgent quest. All right, Eleanor, stop beating around the bush and let's get to the point, I practically growled out. I require your assistance in the interception of a courier, Emma Booker. A courier who currently holds the keys to my future. A future with which I had hastily decided to surrender under former pretenses that have since fundamentally changed. All thanks to your merciful and resourceful nature, the Venerian spoke with a poetic, almost sing-song cadence, finding it in him to draft a whole poem before addressing anything tangible. This courier has in his hands the echoes of my own short-sightedness that once more threatened to doom me. That was, until he finally seemed to get to the point. Do you recall the letter you took from my possession a few days prior? He inquired with a clear hint of frustration. It wasn't clear, however, whether those frustrations were born from this situation, or whether he was still holding a grudge over my snooping of his letter a few days prior. Yeah, I do. Your renunciation of your noble titles, right? I replied, before letting out a sigh, lifting my hand to my forehead. Did it somehow get through the mail? Did you forget to cancel it or put it in a pause or something? Do you consider me so absent-minded that I would commit such a blunder? Eleanor interjected, for a moment dropping his courteous act and returning to that scathing tone of indignancy, capped off with his cobalt hiss. Judging by how you've self-admitted to foolish and short-sighted actions twice now, I'm leaning towards yes rather than no. Just going off the objective data trends, I replied bluntly, prompting the Venerian to let out an even louder, more aggressive hiss. That little outburst didn't last for long, however, as either the truth finally began sinking in, or the time crunch he was under finally started pushing him past the outburst phase with a weak slump. Your observations, while tantamount to judging a person by the sum of their week's worth of correspondences, are understandable to me. For if I were in your position, I would more than likely have responded in a similar manner, the Venerian acknowledged through a strained breath. My eyes widened in reaction to this rare act of empathy. But to get to the point, no, I did not simply forget. What's more, that was my first order of business following the conclusion of our library misadventures. No, what seems to have transpired is a form of, miscommunication, a fault that has manifested somewhere along the line, either through deliberate sabotage or an ability to act within a strict timeline of the bowman. It would seem as if my actions have not had their intended effect, and the letter is now somewhere within the wider system of Shadow Courier, fast approaching the trailless track. I shot out my hand, signaling for the Venerian to pause following that unexpected dump of words that didn't necessarily add up due to a single, yet key, missing context. Evie, did you translate that right? Bowman, I need a disambiguation pass. Passing complete. Translation is accurate, Cadet Booker. Consider inquiring Eleanor for further disambiguation. Let's back up a bit, I began. First off, Bowman, I'm sure you didn't hand off your letter to a bunch of archers, right? Eleanor sighed, moving both hands up towards his temples. It's a wordplay upon an acronym, Emma Booker. The Whisperwind Society's Whisper Men, hence Bowman. Eleanor replied succinctly, prompting the EVI to chime in just as quickly before confusion could take a hold. Point of conflict detected. The High Nexian acronym for Whisperwind Society's Whispermen appears to phonetically match the colloquial pronunciation of the High Nexian term for bowman, archer, hunter. New esoteric colloquialism added to working language database. Oh, I replied promptly, my response directed towards the EVI and Eleanor in equal measure. Understood, I continued, before moving off from that point just as quickly. I assume that you do not need me to explain the concept of shadow couriers next, Earthrealmer? Yeah, no, shadow couriers are pretty self-explanatory, I acknowledged. Language localisms aside, let me ask you this, Eleanor. Why do you need my drone? I paused before gesturing towards the gun, and my gun as well for that matter. The two are necessary for my plan to dispatch with this troublesome situation once and for all. Only through the use of your drone and a weapon such as your gun can we hope to stop this letter. I paused for a moment, putting two and two together, as a flipbook-style animation began manifesting in my head, of Eleanor arming himself with a pistol, before catching a flight down into the town to deal with one of these shadow couriers personally. So you want to hitch a ride on the drone into town, with the intent of shooting one of these bowmen before they can— What? No! By his eternal majesty, Grace, no! Eleanor shot back in a disbelief, before slowly but surely shifting to a thoughtful, pondering look. Perhaps in any other circumstance I might have considered it, but no, not now. Not at this particular juncture. He promptly corrected himself, causing me to shoot him an unamused look of frustration. So what do you need them for? For a fight that only your drone can perform, he answered cryptically, by means of attaching that mannerless ranged weapon onto your mannerless flying artifice. I couldn't believe what I was hearing right now, as I took a moment to regard the Venerian's words with genuine disbelief. My drone has weapons, Eleanor, I replied plainly. Eleanor's eyes blinked rapidly at that response, as he turned his eyes from my holster towards the drone, then back towards my holster in rapid succession. He opened his mouth, as if poised to make an argument, before second-guessing himself with a sullen sigh. My apologies for being proactive with my imagination and what limited information I had to work with, Emma Booker. For I saw no talents, no obvious weapons of the sort, and thus logically assumed that it was defenseless, thus necessitating an addition of your ranged weapon. He pointed to my gun once more, illustrating his point. Either way, my urging stems from the lack of transparency on your end, Emma Booker. The Venerian quickly broke into an inward sigh. But no matter. I must ask then, what manner of weapons do you have within that drone? That depends, Eleanor, I spoke firmly, crossing my arms as I did so. What kind of fight are we looking at? One of the aerial variety, Emma Booker. I narrowed my eyes at that answer. So airmail. Your letter is being shipped via airmail. That is correct. I sighed once more, reaching to clasp my forehead with a firm metallic slap. All right, what are we facing up against? A wyvern, a dragon, a griffin, a dragon-vyron-griffin hybrid? I rattled on, eliciting a sharp quirk of the Venerian's brows as he shook his head slowly. None of the above, but I'm surprised that you know of a dragon-vyron-griffin hybrid given your status as a new realmer, Emma Booker, he reasoned. Wait, what? But that is beside the point. He cut me off before we could dive into another tangent. Our target isn't one of the above. It is simply a messenger bird. I blinked rapidly at the answer. My whole mind practically stopped as I heard what we were up against. And not because of fear, but a huge sense of relief, because despite the armaments present on the mothership, it was nowhere near capable of taking down a dragon. Something I feared that we would have been up against. That's it, I finally managed out with a massive sigh of relief. Do not be fooled by the innocuous nature of this target, Emma Booker, Eleanor warned darkly. For what it lacks in conspicuous strength, it makes up for in inconspicuous camouflage. Good point, I acknowledged, actually agreeing with Eleanor as it felt like we were about to enter an actual productive conversation for once. So any pointers on how we can spot this thing? Our target will be a bird of a feral and typical variety, anything from a sparrow to a phoenix. He paused before correcting his course, though I doubt you'd find much of the latter given its rarity in this part of the Nexus. The Venerian shrugged. As for any distinguishing features, mana fields, Emma Booker, this particular bird will have a slightly above average ebb within the flow of the mana the most. like a rock parting the streams of water in a creek, he explained. So an above-average surge in mana then? Yes. Right then, I can do that, I acknowledged, shifting myself and my gaze back to the mothership before realizing something else. And exactly how many birds in the Nexus typically generate an above-average surge of mana radiation on a typical day-to-day basis? I'm not a bird scholar, Emma Booker, but from what I understand, it is a somewhat typical occurrence, yes. So, how do we pick out yours from the crowd? Does your drone carry limited ammunition? He answered, with an innocent cock of his head. Yes, I answered flatly, and with an unamused look of underneath the helmet. Are you insinuating that we shoot down literally every bird that happens to have an even above-average surge in mana radiation? That is correct, Emma Booker, Eleanor replied, unbothered and completely nonplussed. If ammunition is a concern, this may prove... No, that's not the main concern. I'm more worried about A, blowing your cover, and B, collateral damage in the form of a lot of unnecessary dead animals. Eleanor paused, actually considering those points. You raise valid concerns. If these manaless weapons are anywhere near as loud as your gun, then this may raise more suspicions in the town below than would be preferable. The Venerian began stroking the underside of his chin, pondering the situation at hand, despite not even addressing the collateral damage issue. You claimed your drone was faster than the fastest bird? Yeah. Then I must ask, does your drone have some sort of manual manipulator? Like a claw or an extendable hand? Correct. I can do you one better, I smiled. It has nets. Ones that can be deployed and reeled back mid-air, meant for drone retrieval and enemy drone capture. But I guess it could double as a bird capture tool. The holes are small enough that a sparrow wouldn't be able to escape through it after all. The Venerian responded to this revelation with a hopeful nod, as it seemed as our minds were clicking on exactly what needed to be done next. And I assume these nets are silent, reusable, and plentiful? Correct on all accounts, Eleanor. Then I suggest that we begin post-haste. He couldn't help but let out a slight twitch of his lips and for a minuscule smile, before shrinking it back as quickly as it seemed like another thought entered his mind. I assume that you have confidence in your drone's ability to see in the darkness of the night. You know what? Why don't I address those concerns by letting you see for yourself, Eleanor? I offered vaguely, prompting the Venerian to raise his brow ridge curiously. How? By seeing the world through the eyes of a mannerless artifice. Eleanor now had front row seats to a bird's eye, and more accurately the virtual cockpit view of the drone as I continued maneuvering it carefully into town. The active camo surfaces and the distance from the town itself proved a safe screen by which to operate with a level of discretion. Funnily enough, Eleanor had done the same for our end of operation, casting a cone of silence and some magical camo around the balcony which hid us from any unsuspecting eyes and ears. We had full visibility over the entire town from the drone's vantage point, save for a single district that seemed to be covered in an unnaturally forming fog that started and ended along strangely artificial lines, demarcated by the abrupt cessation of the opaque grey mist along street lines and rooftops instead of naturally thinning out over the large distances. Aside from that anomaly, the whole town was right there for us to see. I didn't even need to turn on night vision mode, given how bright everything was, even this late into the night. Despite that, the drone's automatic functions, aided by the EVI, was passing through every available spectral range within the camera's and sensors' capabilities, creating this almost otherworldly composite layering effect upon the live feed that was as chaotic as it was oddly mesmerizing. The sentiment that seemed to be shared by the Venerian, whose eyes were practically glued to the screen right now, his expression shifting constantly between confusion, concern, anxiety, and a level of worry probably stemming from what was on the line rather than the view itself. And this is the whole world that you see through your eyes, Earthrealmer? He asked slowly. No, I can, with the aid of my armor and its senses. What I usually see is what you saw in my sightseer, though. So no. However, this is typically what my drones see, as it allows it to better accomplish its various missions, such as the one I originally set out to do. I answered curtly, just as several things began happening on my end of the live feed. Namely, the rescue operation of the survey drones that survived the blast, of which only one managed to dock with the mothership successfully so far. For the most part, though, this segment of the operation was done in silence. Despite that, I still had one eye open towards the skies, for the sake of Eleanor's added side quest. though it was clear from the tap-tap-tapping of his feet that Eleanor wasn't the type to be composed in these calm, before-the-storm situations. However, just as he was about to address his anxieties, opening his mouth to question it, alert, target parameters met, target group bearing grid 107-395-225, trajectory calculated, intercept yes or no. All hell quickly broke loose. Several things started happening all at once now, and Eleanor was for the first time getting to see firsthand the hectic realities of modern combat, or at the very least, the toned-down version of it. My entire focus now shifted to my HUD, the flock of birds that had originated from the outskirts of the town, becoming almost like a flight of enemy drones in my mind. Training and reflexes kicked in, augmented by the EVI's micro-corrections to the mothership's course. As we caught up to the speedy group of avians, whose velocities would have been impressive to an ornithologist, but failed to impress the drone operator in me. This made the hyperfocus less necessary, as by the point I'd arrived around the flock, the whole battle was already decided. There was now like shooting fish in a barrel. The whole thing was over with the push of a button. The flock of birds didn't even know what hit them as the drone deployed a massive high-tensile E-warfare rating netting. One that would have otherwise absolutely fired or disabled non-hardened electronics on contact, and rendered all radio communications from within and without inert. But on this occasion, merely acted as an over-engineered animal capture tool, which, to its credit, was a role it slipped into seamlessly. This was true even if the whole flight of birds began absolutely panicking mid-air, their wings flapping about in sheer distress, their collective weight and absolute terror causing an inexperienced Eleanor to become visibly worried for the flight stability of the mothership. However, given the fact that it was rated for enemy drone capture and retrieval, no amount of flapping from even 100 birds would have made much of a dent on the sturdily engineered machine. "Batch 1 captured," I announced with an ecstatic cheer. "Now, do any of these look like what we were looking for, Eleanor?" I asked, before pointing all cameras at the panic net of birds, some of which occasionally glanced towards one of the mothership's many unfeeling camera lenses with an unadulterated terror. The Venerian began combing through the footage, his face clearly frustrated by the lack of mana stream, no doubt, but trying to make do as he seemed hyperfixated on their talons. "Shake them," he ordered unenthusiastically. "What? I know what I'm doing. Shake them vigorously, Earthrabber. There's an art to this process," he reasoned, prompting me to genuinely question his sanity, before going through with it anyways. The whole net full of birds let out a cacophony of terrified squawks and traumatized cries at that, as the Venerian began tilting his head to and fro before sighing. "Use your manual manipulator to go through each one. Bring it up to your drone's eye and allow me to inspect them closely." I complied, not because of any sense of faith in the Venerian's plans, but because he was nominally in charge of determining exactly whether or not we'd caught our target. A proportionally sized mechanical arm emerged from the underside of the drone, one that was 3-clawed as opposed to my 5-fingered backpack-mounted arms, which seemed to repulse the Venerian even more so. With a small calibration of its servos, it immediately jammed itself into the net, prompting even more panicked squawks to erupt, before it managed to pull out what looked to be a cross between a seagull and a puffin, its chest heaving as its little head cocked back and forth in every direction. "No," Eleanor announced after a cursory look, prompting the drone to release it, where it quickly flew off into the night. "Next." The whole process was repeated to the tune of panicked squawks and cold, unfeeling whirs, ending with another resounding no from the Venerian, prompting the whole process to be repeated yet again. This continued for some time, ultimately leaving us with nothing but an empty bag and a frightened flock. The Venerian sighed, crossing his arms. "We still have the whole night, but I have a sinking suspicion we'll soon be onto our target rather than later." "And you know this how?" "I've worked with the bowmen before, Emma," Eleanor admitted through a despondent breath. "More than I would have liked, but the fact remains, I know with relative precision the sorts of time frames they operate on, so do not fret. We'll sooner have our target secured than suffer from the dullness of wild goose chase. I can guarantee that much." That guarantee, however, turned out to be as empty as the Venerian's half-hearted promises. As flock, alert, target parameters met, target group bearing grid 209-539-723, trajectory calculated, intercept, yes or no. After flock, alert, target parameters met, target group bearing grid 752-375-295, trajectory calculated, intercept, yes or no. After terrified, squawk, shocked, chirp, 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 panicked, coo, coo, and dazed flocks. Alert, target parameters met. Target group bearing grid 498-1095925, trajectory calculated, intercept, yes or no. Turned out to be duds. And after an entire hour of exhaustive flying, of grabbing more birds than the ornithologists would in their entire doctorate program, we ended up with nothing but even more frustration and wasted power. It was around the same time that we encountered a relatively bizarre series of birds that flew individually, yet maintained a higher than average level of background bend and radiation. Tracking down these birds was a bit more difficult, requiring more aerial acrobatics than I would have been comfortable with in the mothership. Yet, upon grabbing them, they seemed no less innocuous than any other bird hybrid we captured so far. The night had become quieter after that, as Illinois had promptly grabbed a chair from the living room and propped himself atop of it. "I trust that you are still comfortable standing up, Earthrower?" Illinois asked through a strangely empathetic breath. "I'm fine," I shot back frustratingly. "That's good," he nodded. "I genuinely hope you still have faith in my assertions, for I know for a fact that we're getting close to..." Alert. Target parameters met. Target group bearing grid 32-172-98. Trajectory calculated. Intercept, yes or no. A flock of birds, a massive flock of them in fact, emerged from the shadowy part of the town my senses had had a difficult time penetrating. Eleanor's eyes widened at the sheer breadth of them this time around, as it looked like one of those migrating flocks capable of outright blotting out the sun rather than any old group of random birds. "This is it," Eleanor announced. "I'm sure of it." "You don't say," I uttered out with a tired contempt, revving up the mothership's engines as I repeated the motions of the chase that had quickly become muscle memory by this point. However, unlike the rest of the engagements thus far, this flock was proving to be far more difficult to deal with. Simply put, there were way too many of them. What's more, mana radiation signals were everywhere within and around the flock. "Eleanor, I can't cast a net that's going to get us all of them all at once. You're going to have to give me some pointers in order to..." "I know what this is," he interrupted abruptly, his eyes widening in worrisome shock. "At least 3/4 of this flock are an illusion, a projection. Tell me, does your drone detect mana surges homogeneously throughout the flock?" "My senses aren't that sensitive, but if you were to eyeball it, then yeah, that seems to be the case." "Then this is a trick out of my book." He narrowed his eyes as he retraced his fingers across the tablet. "There, Emma Booker, target your net, trading ahead of the flock. From there, allow it to drag through the flock, like a sky trawler, casting a net ahead of a school of flight fish. Except you'll find that a good portion of these birds are merely illusions that'll dissipate upon contact with a physical barrier." With a flock of birds moving at an even greater speed than any other flock thus far, and the signal risking cutting out even if a second was spent improperly, I took Eleanor's advice and ran with it. The maneuvers were simple enough. The massive flock reacted, but not quick enough for the fishing trawler's trick to begin in earnest. I quickly parked the thing in front of the flock and deployed the net. Sure enough, the entire section of flock dematerialized, prompting me to take immediate action of my own volition. "Emma, you should..." Training and gut instinct overrode Eleanor's advice now, as I made a hasty call to back left, catching the flock as it attempted to veer off, but was stopped by superior speed and maneuverability of the drone. Row after row of birds dematerialized in seconds the instant they made contact with the net, as I found that almost all of the flock were completely and utterly phantoms, despite every single bird registering as solid pings on almost all of the drone's sensors, similar to Eleanor's null trick at the workshop. No sooner did I realize that, however, did we net something, a single, solitary, solid bird, a lone survivor out of a flock of fakes, a hawk-like pigeon of all things that sat there lazily in the net, stretching its talons to and fro without a care in the world. "All right, we caught it," I announced. But no sooner did I manage to say that, did Eleanor's eyes grow wide. "That's not it, that behavior. Emma, release it now." "What? What are you..." "If you value your drone in this quest, release it and kill it now." I barely had time to react as several sensors began going wild, most notably several overheat and mana radiation sensors. The net soon went up in flames. And following that, a burst of fire slammed against the underside of the drone, disorienting the more sensitive sensor suites for a few seconds, but otherwise leaving the drone relatively unscathed. The optical sensors, however, reported on everything as it transpired, as the innocuous bird seemed to erupt into a burst of flames, its feathers, its body, its wings, indeed its whole form seemingly self-igniting. But instead of succumbing to the flames, it simply flew off, leaving a trail of fire behind it, prompting Eleanor to point at the screen incessantly, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Firebird, Emma Booker! We haven't the time! Shoot it! You must shoot it!" My whole world once more slowed to a crawl as I flicked down the tactical drawer of my controller, giving me access to the drone's weapons suite. A lock-on reticle landed squarely on the bird. Half a second later, the reticle lined up, glowing green and beeping incessantly. A second after that came a single, thunderous, earth-shattering bang. It took seconds for that sound to reach us in person, or at least it would have if there wasn't for Eleanor's cone of silence. However, even if it did, all that would be heard from this distance would be more akin to a weak, distant crack of a stray thunder. The Firebird's flight stopped almost immediately after. Its ducking and weaving, reminiscent of a 20th century dogfighting ace, halted abruptly and unceremoniously upon that round being discharged. From here, it fell 7,000 or so feet from the sky, leaving a trail of fire behind that was extinguished about halfway down as it began trailing smoke, and then finally soot. The drone followed it quickly, managing to find nothing but charred pile of grossly overcooked turkey, and what appeared to be a neatly packaged letter alongside it. Using its manipulator to grab it, Eleanor positively ID'd it. "That's it." But not a second later, before the drone was even able to unfurl its arm, the small patch of grassland we found ourselves in suddenly erupted into flames. As the Firebird's carcass began to cremate itself with a small tornado of iridescent flames, ash and embers of this charring corpse suddenly reformed into its former state. "That wasn't a Firebird," Eleanor announced through his hushed breath. "That was a minor phoenix," he practically whispered out as the bird reached for the letter once more, glaring at the drone right through its optics and threatening it with a mighty screech, only to have another thunderous boom ring out not a second after, punching a hole straight through it. Following that, I wasted no time in grabbing the letter before packaging it deep within the drone's cargo bay. No sooner was that accomplished than the phoenix began reforming once again, which prompted Eleanor to answer the question that was rapidly forming in my mind. "It'll follow us until its mission is done," he spoke firmly. "There is only one way to get rid of it." "Dunk its ashes in the river?" I shot back sarcastically. "Yes," Eleanor acknowledged with a nod. "How did you know?" "Forget about it. Let's just do it," I sighed frustratingly, as I began revving the drone back up to altitude and speed, prompting a chase with the offending bird. What happened next was a scene pulled straight from a video game. As I weaved, ducked, and maneuvered this way and that, avoiding fireballs, flames, and even the errant attempt at melee from the bird, it was a straight 30 seconds of non-stop aerial aerobatics before we found ourselves above a stream that flowed right from Lake Ithilia. From there, I bided my time, ducking this way and that before the time was right for the perfect shot. "Gotcha," I spoke under a sweat-laden grin. Bang, causing the bird to die for a third time, its body plunging straight into the rapids below, as it began disintegrating into dust within the water itself. Steam bubbled and billowed from beneath the water, but after a few solid minutes of waiting, nothing re-emerged. We eventually met each other's gaze moments after the bubbles had been carried down the stream and out of visual range. "We were lucky that it was a minor phoenix." Eleanor sighed with relief. "Otherwise, it's typical for the gods forbid Great Phoenix would be impervious to this trick." I slid back against my armor immediately after Eleanor's little confirmation, turning on the in-armor postural readjustment tool as I sat there for a few solid seconds, but not before ordering the EVI to RTB the thing back to the balcony. The next few moments were spent in silence as I simply sat there monitoring the mothership's flight path back to the balcony. Eleanor seemed to mirror that sentiment too, as he basically sank into his chair, sighs of relief escaping his maw every so often until eventually the drone returned. The blue thing yanked the letter from its three-clawed appendage aggressively, checked it meticulously, scanning it with a surge of mana radiation before lighting it up with a flame of his own, which reduced it to ash. All the while, the EVI's mana notification warnings began disappearing one by one, probably marking the dissolution of both the invisibility and the privacy barriers by this point. From there, Eleanor turned to face me with a look of relief colored with a sense of genuine appreciation. "Thank you again, Earthrealmer," he spoke, this time even more earnestly than before. "I have never met someone with such capacity for charity and compassion." He lowered his head, not so much in a bow, as just a deep nod of gratitude. It's all right, Eleanor, I replied quickly, correcting myself. You owe me one, though, I stated bluntly, making sure to balance my modest earth sensibilities with Nexian social decorum. That much I understand, Everbooker, Eleanor nodded in acknowledgement. Well, in any case, I think we should. Knock, knock, knock. A series of knocks stopped me in my tracks, prompting both of our gazes to face the source of the interruption. The front door. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps. Cold War Boomerwaffen, Sevaren Serberous, Bushmaster 177, Henry the Red, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Sevaren Serberous. Thank you very much.